All right, so we're looking at your notes packet, and I would like you to turn to number 3. And we're going to look at part A and part B. So right here in front of me I have part A, and what they want you to do is sketch a graph of this function. But we can't use our calculator. I mean, we can use it as a reference, but it does ask you to find the zeros and determine the sign of the values of the function between the zeros. So you're going to have to show work. So your calculator is a good reference, a good check, so to speak, but we really do need to show the work. So we're going to start by finding the zeros. So that's basically where this graph hits the x-axis. Now you could put this into your y equals and you could see where they hit the x-axis. Or what we can do is we can just look at these factors and we can see that there's technically 4 factors, but 1/2, remember when we make like a little t-chart here, so to speak, we can't set 1/2 equal to 0. Well, we can, but it won't be equal to it. So that factor kind of cancels out. So then we're going to take each of these factors and we're going to, one by one, set them equal to 0. And the last one, x minus 2 equal to 0. So to find the actual zeros, all we do is, let's just undo that. We're going to subtract 5, subtract 5. So our first 0 here is going to be x equals -5. Then we're going to here in this one, we're going to add 1 to both sides. Those will cancel out. And x equals 1 is our next 0. And lastly, we're going to add 2 to both sides. Not thinking here. There we go. And we're going to get our last 0, which is x equals 2. Now, again, you can check this with your calculator, and these should be the 3 places that if you were to graph, the function will hit the x-axis at these 3 places. All right, so we did find the zeros. Now it says to determine the sign of the values of the function between the zeros. We need to do this algebraically. So basically what we do is we make something called a sign chart. So it's kind of like a number line. And I'm going to take my 3 zeros and I'm going to put them on my little number line, my little sign chart here. And I'm going to go in numerical order. Okay, and this is a sign chart for the function. So basically what I want to know is before -5, to the left of -5, is my graph above the x-axis or is it below the x-axis? So the way we do that is we pick a number that's less than -5 or to the left of -5. So let's say I pick -6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do f of -6. Okay, so I'm going to go back up to this original equation right up here, and I'm going to plug in a -6. Now we don't need to get crazy here, so watch, I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to put 1/2, and then I'm going to put a -6 in there. So I'm going to do -6 plus 5, then -6 minus 1, and then -6 minus 2. All right, we don't need to get crazy on what the numbers are. We want to know whether it's positive or negative, and I'll explain why in a minute. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to keep this 1/2. Let's look at this first set of parentheses right here. Will that number be a positive or a negative number? That's all I want to know, positive or negative. And I do see that, well, the 6 is higher, so it's going to be something that's negative. So I'm just going to put a little negative there. Then I'm going to do -6 minus 1. Well, I also know that that's going to be something negative as well. And then I'm going to look at the last set of parentheses, and I see it says -6 minus 2. Well, I know that's something negative as well. So then all you really have to do is, at this point, you just need to kind of ask yourself, well, if I have a negative times a negative times a negative, what do I end up with? And what I end up with is a negative number. Okay? So I'm going to go back up here on this little sign chart, and I'm going to put a little minus sign there. What that's telling me then is, if I draw the graph, before the -5, or to the left of negative 5, my graph is going to be below the x-axis because this is negative. Okay? All right, so we're going to repeat this process now for the next interval. So between negative 5 and 1, I would want to pick, let's say, maybe 0. That would be something that should be pretty easy, I think, right? So we're going to do f of 0. All right, so we go back and we look at the original equation, and we've got 1/2. You have x plus 5, so I'm going to put in 0 plus 5. Then we've got x minus 1, so I'm going to do 0 minus 1. And then we have x minus 2, so I'm going to do 0 minus 2. And just like the last one, what we're going to do is we're just going to simply figure out whether the number is going to be positive or negative. So 0 plus 5, I know that that's a positive number. 0 minus 1 is negative. And 0 minus 2 is also negative. So then what I have is a positive times a negative times a negative. And that ends up giving me a positive number. So I'm going to put a little plus sign here. I'm going to repeat it again. So now I'm going to do f of, 1.5. Okay, 1.5. So I'm going to do 1/2, 1.5 plus 5. Then in the next parentheses, 1.5 minus 1. And then in the last parentheses, 1.5 minus 2. And again, just looking for the signs. So this 1/2, we know that's positive, so that's just coming along for the ride there. Here we have a positive. Here we have also a positive. And this last one, we have a negative. So positive times a positive times a negative will be a negative. And then the last one we're going to do is we're going to try to squeeze this in. We're going to try f of, we need something bigger than 2. So let's say 3. Okay? So we're going to do 1/2. We're going to do 3 plus 5. Then we're going to do 3 minus 1. And then we're going to do 3 minus 2. So we have 1/2, which we know is positive. This will give me a positive. 3 minus 1 will give me a positive. And 3 minus 2 will give me a positive. So those are all positives, so we will have a plus sign there. All right, so here is our sign chart that we have, and I just kind of sketched a little graph here. So we know that our zeros are at negative 5, so that means that the graph will hit the x-axis at negative 5. It's going to hit the x-axis at 1, and it's going to hit the x-axis at 2. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look right here, and we notice that when the graph is to the left of negative 5, that we have a negative sign. And so basically what that means for us is that the graph will be below the x-axis. So it's going to look something like that. All right, now we need to see, though, what's happening with the graph when we look between this interval right in here. So between negative 5 and a positive 1 right in here. So we want to know whether the graph is going to be above or below the x-axis. Well, let's go up here and let's look at our sign chart here, and we notice that we have a plus sign. So basically what that's telling us is that the function will be above the x-axis between negative 5 and positive 1. Okay, so we're going to, again, the graph will be above the x-axis between negative 5 and a positive 1. So then what we're going to do is our graph will look maybe something like that. All right, next we look between 1 and 2. And if we look between 1 and 2, we notice, if we look here at our sign chart, that there's a negative sign there. So that means that our graph is going to be below the x-axis between 1 and 2. So something like that. And then lastly, we're going to look to the right of 2. And then when you look to the right of 2, you should see that our sign is positive. So basically what that means is that our function will go above the x-axis after 2. And there's the graph of your function. All right, so let's look at letter B, I should say. So we're going to do the same thing that we did the last time. We're going to find the zeros. So we have a -1. Well, that can't be equal to 0, right? And then we have x plus 2. We're going to set that equal to 0. We have x minus 4. We're going to set that equal to 0. And lastly, we have x minus 6, and we're going to set that equal to 0. So over here, we get x equals -2. Then we have x equals 4. And then we have x equals 6. So these are our 3 zeros, which tells us where the function is going to hit the x-axis. So we're going to do a sign chart for the function. And like a number line again, we're going to, in order, put those zeros on our sign chart. Okay, so then remember what we're going to do is we're going to pick values, and those values that we're going to pick are going to be in between these zeros. So for example, I'm looking at -2 there. I'm going to pick something smaller than -2. So like, let's say I'm going to pick f of -3. And I'm going to plug it back into the original function. Now there is a negative all the way in front there. So I'm going to put -3 into the first set of parentheses, and I get +2. And then I'm going to put -3 into the second set of parentheses, -4. And then -3 into the last set of parentheses, -6. Alrighty, so I have a negative here, times a negative here, times another negative here, times another negative here. So I have 4 negatives, which gives me a positive in that first spot there. All right, then I'm going to go and I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to pick something between -2 and +4. I like 0. That's something nice and easy. So I have a negative in front. Then I'm going to do 0 plus 2. Then I'm going to do 0 minus 4. And then I'm going to do 0 minus 6. So let's bring down that first negative. Well, in this first set of parentheses, I have a positive number. In the second set, I have a negative number. And then in the last set, I also have a negative number. So I have a negative times a positive times a negative times a negative. And when you do all of that, we've got a negative number. So we're going to put a negative right in there. So now let's go on and let's pick, let's see, we need something between 4 and 6. So 5 seems like a pretty good option, right? So we're going to put in 5 plus 2. Then we're going to do 5 minus 4. And then we're going to do 5 minus 6. Oops, that's a 6. All right, so I have a negative times a positive times a positive times a negative. So when you look at all of that, that will give you a positive. All right, lastly, we want to pick something bigger than 6, so let's just try 7. So then I'm going to put in 7 plus 2. Then I'm going to do 7 minus 4. And then I'm going to do 7 minus 6. So I have a negative here. Then let's see, what do I have? I have a positive number there. I have another positive number there, and yet another positive number there, which gives me a negative. So we have our sign chart up here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this sign chart, and that is going to help us with our graph. All right, so I'm going to just do a squeeze in the graph down here. So I have -2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so let's put in our zeros. So I have a 0 at -2. I have a 0 at 1, 2, 3, 4. And I have another 0 here at 6. Alrighty, so let's look at the first sign on the sign chart. So to the left of -2, notice that my graph is going to be above the x-axis because that sign is positive. So I'm going to go down here, and before -2, it's going to look like that. All right, the next thing I want to do is I want to look between -2 and 4, and when I look between -2 and 4, I notice that my sign is negative, which tells me that my graph of the function is going to be below the x-axis. So it will look something like that. Then I'm going to look between 4 and 6. And when I look between 4 and 6, I see that the sign is positive, which means the graph of the function will be above the x-axis. So it'll look like that. And lastly, if we look to the right of 6, we notice that the sign is negative, which means that the function will go below the x-axis. So that's what your graph of the function is going to look like.